Hare Krishna. Over the years, there's been quite a bit of talk and multiple GBC resolutions on the topic of Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. That means ladies acting in the role of initiating spiritual master. And my stand over that time has been consistent, which is that women are not meant to take the same initiator role as men. From my perspective, the evidence on which the current proposal stands is it's weak, it's inconclusive, and it's selective. I've repeatedly made my thoughts known to the GBC, but with this video, I'm making it known to the devotee community. I feel it's my duty to comment on what I'm convinced of is a faulty decision that has many unseen consequences, and let's say it's a distraction from what Srila Prabhupada wants. At least I'm true to my conscience. Now, no doubt my presentation and my logic will not be perfect, but I consider that safer than the current proposal is for ISKCON to do what Srila Prabhupada did, and that was no Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. Hare Krishna. I offer my respects to my watchers and my listeners. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Let's begin. The current standard for Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus, as stated by the most recent GBC resolution, is the following, and I'm reading out, and you can see it for yourself. Quote, a mature, qualified female devotee may accept the role of an initiating spiritual master. What's the qualification? At least 55 years of age and in a stable family situation, living under the protection of a husband, elder son or son-in-law, qualified householder couple, or senior Vaishnava or Vaishnavi Sangha. End quote. Okay, I agree. Women can initiate, no doubt. But the question is, at what level of Krishna consciousness? Prabhupada and Gaudiya tradition cite those on the level of Janava, Gangamata, Sita Thakurani. These are not conditioned souls. So yes, women can initiate. They can even act as acharya, but not as do men at the stages of sadhana. Now, on what basis do I say that? Okay. Here's my praman. Here is my evidence. Exclusively on Srila Prabhupada's explicit statements about women being a Diksha Guru or initiating spiritual master, I mean to keep the argument simple. That's based on direct and not indirect statements. Prabhupada's explicit statements on the topic of Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Guru are our strongest evidence on what he wanted. I'm just going to repeat that. Exclusively on Prabhupada's explicit statements about women being Diksha Guru, which means that I'm not going to introduce other secondary evidence that can be argued in so many ways and is being argued in so many ways. For instance, I will not use the hundreds of unqualified statements about everyone being a guru, spoken by Srila Prabhupada. But that could be Shiksha Guru, Diksha Guru, Vartmapradarshika Guru. I'm not going to introduce Varnashram considerations. What are the roles of women in society? I'll not cite other Shastra or their interpretation. And I'm not going to get into the detail of Gaudiya tradition on women giving Diksha. And lastly, I'm not going to talk about what other Vaishnav Sampradayas or what Gaudiyas think about this new resolution of ISKCON. So let's keep it simple, direct, and explicit. And really with the straw between my teeth, let me most honestly say that I have all appreciation for the women in the Krishna consciousness movement and for the service that they've rendered over the years since day one. ISKCON would not be where it is without them. I don't know if ISKCON would be without them. And I do recognize that some women have been and are continuing to be abused and mistreated. However, because I'm taking this stand in this video, I want to point out that I'm not a male chauvinist. Obviously, I'm also not a feminist. Neither do I want to be politically correct to suit the thoughts of people outside the movement or those who want to be politically correct within the movement. And I recognize that some devotees will be upset by my opinions and they're going to want to argue. I don't want to respond, and I won't. I've been arguing with the GBC for over a decade. This is just a presentation. You can take it or leave it. If you don't like it, just press the button and Shivaram Swami disappears. So here's the summary of the video. This is going to run for about 40 minutes total. I'm going to present three aspects in this argument. The first one is the weakness and speculation that surrounds the Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Guru's proponent's primary evidence, the resolution itself, which is based on 2 letters and a conversation. The second is Prabhupada's own instructions, which nullify or at least put into question the very validity of that evidence. In other words, the use of letters and conversations. The third one, which for me is what is substantial, and that is Srila Prabhupada's books and the message of his own conduct, which both say that there are no Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Gurus. Okay, so let's start with examining the foremost and most direct evidence. And here's the main evidence for Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Gurus. In 2 letters, Srila Prabhupada in 1969 writes about this topic of men and women initiating. So let's look at one of these. This is the more elaborate one. The other one more or less just repeats what's been stated here. So you can read this along with me. It's in quotation marks. Srila Prabhupada says, "I want that all of my spiritual sons and daughters will inherit this title of Bhaktivedanta so that the family transcendental diploma will continue through the generations. Those possessing the title of Bhaktivedanta will be allowed to initiate disciples. Maybe by 1975, all of my disciples will be allowed to initiate and increase the number of generations. That is my program." This is a letter to Hamsadura on January 3rd, 1969. A similar letter was sent to Kirtanananda. The other main evidence is the conversation I mentioned, and this is some years later in 1976 to Professor O'Connell, who was a professor in Toronto University. Srila Prabhupada was there. And Professor O'Connell asks, "Is it possible, Swamiji, for a woman to be a guru in the line of disciplic succession?" And Srila Prabhupada answers, yes. Janava Devi was Nityananda's wife. She became. If she is able to go to the highest perfection of life, why it is not possible to become guru? But not so many. Okay, so let's look at the evidence behind the resolution, and let's start with the letters. And I must admit that these letters had me really wondering. They indicated to me that Srila Prabhupada had some idea of his disciples, women included, being initiators. It's interesting to note, this is just sort of a side comment, that the devotee who received the letter never got the impression that Srila Prabhupada actually wanted women to initiate. Anyway, let's go on. I use this phrase, some idea, because it's very confusing. And I'm going to ask you to really look at the letter literally, closely. If we do, what is Prabhupada saying? He's saying that every devotee who passed this exam, Bhaktivedanta exam, regardless of age or ashram, is meant to become a guru. Now, I did the Bhakti Shastri exam in 1976, and if this Bhaktivedanta exam was anything to go by, it was very easy. The Bhakti Shastri exam, at present I can remember that it was 4 questions, and 2 of the questions were who is Krishna and who is Lord Chaitanya. So it wasn't really very tough. So now you just let your imagination go. Imagine brahmacharis, brahmacharinis living in the temple ashram, and now we're going back to 50 years, along with perhaps grihastas, husband and wife with little children, that all of these are going to be acting as Diksha gurus. How does that actually work? How does it function in the perspective of what Srila Prabhupada said? It's not clear. And Prabhupada, of course, didn't clarify any further. And contrast that further with differing statements of a conversation that we also cited with Professor O'Connell. Here, Prabhupada is going, he now says, well, there's not so many. When Professor asks about women being gurus, Prabhupada said not so many. But back in '69, he said all. So now all of a sudden, all became not so many. And of course, interestingly, Professor O'Connell talks about guru, and Srila Prabhupada answers about guru. It doesn't really say initiating guru, but Prabhupada brings up the example of Janava. And here's another little piece of information just to sort of elaborate on reasons for lack of clarity in what Srila Prabhupada meant. And this is a few years later, in 1972, to his first GBC men. Srila Prabhupada communicates to them, and he tells them, gradually, they, GBC, will be initiators. At least first initiation, you must make advance. And is that what Srila Prabhupada had thought in 1969? Here's at least first initiation. That means some may give first initiation, some may give first and second. It's not clear what's Prabhupada's idea. And of course, about the topic of being guru and becoming guru, we should also keep in perspective that Srila Prabhupada only talked to men. He never talked to women about becoming guru. Why not? And then in 1975, which is what Srila Prabhupada thought, maybe by 1975 nothing happened. And neither did Srila Prabhupada mention anything, that I had this idea in 1969. And when 1977 came, and unfortunately that was the last year Srila Prabhupada was with us, then the 1969 all disciples and the 1972 all GBC men now became, Prabhupada said, I will select some of you. And the sons and daughters became only men. What did Srila Prabhupada have in mind? So if you look at these change of ideas, when we're talking about who Prabhupada is talking about, he's talking from all the disciples to all GBC members to some senior devotees. And what is he speaking about? Well, at least first. What does that mean? And what is the gender? Well, in the beginning it's sons and daughters, but it ends up being sons. So this is why I say that in 1969 Prabhupada had some idea, but in light of these other things, and of course there's a lot more, but these things are there and they're prominent in the evidence itself that substantiates the resolution. It's really quite speculative to say that this is what Srila Prabhupada's idea was. It's just, there's too much lack of clarity to say this is what Prabhupada wanted. It's not clear what Prabhupada wanted. And to say so is a very selective interpretation of the letter. It doesn't address the implication of Prabhupada wrote in the letter as well as the conversation. And so the legislation at the present, it doesn't represent its own evidence. In other words, the evidence on which the current resolution stands doesn't support the resolution. And what to speak of then other statements of Srila Prabhupada on the topic. Okay, so we looked at the letters. Now I want to move to the conversation and see that there's a similar lack of clarity with Professor O'Connell's conversation. Because, and I've mentioned this before, from 1969, all now became not so many. Everyone can be guru, but now not so many can become guru. And we're talking about guru, not initiating guru, but that's a detail really. And Srila Prabhupada again gives the example of Janava. And in that room is sitting an Indian lady who asks questions later on. Srila Prabhupada doesn't say, and she can become a guru. He's talking about Janava, and neither does he cite any of his disciples. So for me, we're again left to speculate. What did Srila Prabhupada actually mean? And especially, I want to bring in a second conversation that Srila Prabhupada had, answering, and this is the only other conversation that answers this same question. This time it's posed by a disciple, Aitreya Rishi. And he asks about women acting in the role of guru. And Srila Prabhupada answers, it's not that a woman cannot become acharya. Generally, they do not become. In a very special case, but Janava Devi was accepted, but she did not declare. This is 1972. So now the scope of what Srila Prabhupada means about Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus expanding from all, we say, well, generally they don't, or very special case, and they do not declare. What does this mean? She did not declare. Do men declare? Is it different from what men do than what women do? Well, obviously it's not clear. And what's a very special case? What makes it so special? If you look at the current resolution, being 55 years old, is that special? I mean, it happens to everybody in due course of time. So what's special about that? But what Srila Prabhupada meant about being very special, it's not clear. He didn't elaborate. So the evidence on which the decision is based is really very far from being conclusive. This primary evidence of 2 letters and conversation, it leaves unanswered questions, it has complex applications. We don't know what kind of initiators Prabhupada envisaged, at least first. The evidences proposed are contradictory, and the contradictions are not resolved by the GBC resolutions. So we have all women, not so many, generally they don't, very special cases. So once again, I'm just repeating, the resolution lacks sound basis on its own evidence. The evidence behind the resolution doesn't back the resolution. Hare Krishna, this is the first part of the presentation, and now we're going to move on to the second. Hare Krishna. The second part of my presentation will concentrate on how Srila Prabhupada disqualifies actually the evidence upon which the Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā guru proposal stands. Let me just introduce you to this. Prabhupada stated that he didn't want the letters or the conversations to end up in the public forum. Now, that instruction casts further clouds over the evidence of the resolution. And Srila Prabhupada does say that what he wanted to say was in his books. No need to look elsewhere. Okay, let's just turn to what Srila Prabhupada actually said. Now, interestingly, in the same year that Srila Prabhupada wrote those 2 letters about all his sons and daughters giving initiation, Srila Prabhupada wrote the following letter, quote, and you can see this. I shall request you not to circulate all my letters that I address to you. Letters are sometimes personal and confidential, and if all letters are circulated, it may react reversely. I have already got some hints, like that with letters I sent to you regarding Kirtananda and Hayagriva. So, in the future, please do not circulate my letters to you. All my letters to you should be considered as confidential, and if you want at all to circulate, you must ask me before doing so. Srila Prabhupada's intent here is really quite clear. He says, don't circulate the letters. They're personal and confidential. They may act reversely. And this certainly casts a certain cloud on the validity of the evidence, because these are Srila Prabhupada's words himself. But there's more. And now we're going to move forward into 1977, Prabhupada's last year with us, in August. Here Srila Prabhupada spoke about his letters. He didn't want his letters in the public domain. In 77, a devotee wrote to Srila Prabhupada, and he wanted his blessings to transcribe his recordings and to publish them as a cross-reference for his books. Now that sounds like a great idea, and in fact, that's happened since Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. But Srila Prabhupada gave the following instruction. Tamal Krishna Maharaj wrote the letter, and he quoted Srila Prabhupada here. This is not necessary. My books are sufficient. Let all of my disciples read my books. This idea is overburdened. It will mean too many readings. Let them read whatever is there and digest it. Everything I have wanted to say, I have said in my books. This will only be superfluous. Tell him to concentrate on reading my books, not on studying such transcriptions. Does he think he will find something else in these transcriptions that are not in my books? Prabhupada's pretty emphatic. He repeats himself from different angles of vision. And Prabhupada is restricting the information, restricting the teachings to which devotees should turn, his own teachings. So Srila Prabhupada's talking about reference outside of his books, his own words that he spoke either in class or conversations or morning walks. Prabhupada says this is an overburden. It's not necessary. Why? Because everything I have wanted to say, I have said in my books. And so Prabhupada says it's superfluous. And he concludes by saying, does he think he will find something that's not in my books? So this puts into further question his conversation with academic O'Connell, another recording of a conversation. So here we summarize that the primary evidence on which the concept of Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Guru is based is just those letters and conversation. But Srila Prabhupada discounts them as valid evidence. So at least the use of such evidence becomes highly questionable, and for me and some others it becomes invalid. The conclusion should be that having first shown that the evidence itself is contradictory, and now that Srila Prabhupada discounts it, that the resolution is insubstantial and unsound. And that should be enough. But I'll go on to the final part of the argument, and that's the third part. The third part of my presentation, which for me is the conclusive evidence, is that evidence of the book Bhagavat and the person Bhagavat, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. In part one, I showed the weakness and contradiction in the evidence itself on which the Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Guru resolution is based. And in part two, it was seen that Srila Prabhupada himself discounted the evidence, making it at least questionable. Now, this third part shows that the Bhagavatam commentary, Srila Prabhupada's own words, says that women cannot be initiators. Moreover, Srila Prabhupada's personal conduct establishes what he wanted, and that was no Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā Gurus. He didn't establish any. So the overriding emphasis and the overriding weight of the evidence is on the book Bhagavat and the person Bhagavat. And let's start with what Prabhupada said in his books. Now, in commenting on Dhruva's concern for his mother's liberation, Srila Prabhupada writes in the 4th canto, and you can read this, quote, Dhruva had a feeling of obligation to his mother Suniti. It was Suniti who had given him the clue which had now enabled him to be personally carried to the Vaikuntha planet by the associates of Lord Vishnu. He now remembered her and wanted to take her with him. Actually, Dhruva Maharaj's mother Suniti was his Pat Pradarshika Guru. Pat Pradarshika Guru means the guru or the spiritual master who shows the way. Such a guru is sometimes called the Shiksha Guru. Although Narada Muni was his Diksha Guru, initiating spiritual master, Suniti, his mother, was the first who gave him instruction on how to achieve the favor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the duty of the Shiksha Guru or Diksha Guru to instruct the disciple in the right way, and it depends on the disciple to execute the process. According to Shastric injunction, there's no difference between Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru, and generally the Shiksha Guru later on becomes the Diksha Guru. Suniti, however, being a woman, and specifically his mother, could not become Dhruva Maharaj's Diksha Guru. Still, he was not less obliged to Suniti. There was no question of carrying Narada Muni to Vaikuntha Loka, but Dhruva Maharaj thought of his mother. This is the purport in the 4th canto. You may want to take note that this was written years after Srila Prabhupada wrote that letter, or those 2 letters in 1969. In this purport, Prabhupada makes clear a woman can become Pat Pradarshika Guru. She can become a Shiksha Guru, but she cannot become a Diksha Guru. This is Shastra, and for us, it's the primary evidence, the primary praman. Our system is that Shrimad-bhagavatam and its commentary overrides all other evidence. So even if you consider the letter and the conversation valid evidence, it has to be seen in relation to the Bhagavatam. And if you can't reconcile that lower evidence with this higher, then you have to reject it. As Prabhupada said, does he think he will find something else in these transcriptions that are not in my books? This means that the letter and transcriptions say what's in the books, or the books say what he meant in the letter and in the transcriptions. And that's the proper understanding. This purport of Srila Prabhupada clarifies what the letters and the conversation actually mean. There's a lack of clarity about them. Now Prabhupada makes it clear. That is what Srila Prabhupada taught us. Reconcile everything with the authority of Shrimad-bhagavatam. And now we come to our final evidence. Some may consider Srila Prabhupada's conduct as being the strongest evidence. What does that conduct say? Srila Prabhupada did not make any Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. All right, but some will challenge. But does this mean something? Well, according to Shastra, it does. What does Shastra state? Chaitanya Charitamrita, Kaviraj Goswami says, Dharma stapana hetu sadura vyavahar. A devotee's behavior establishes the true purpose of religious principles. So the conduct of a Mahabhagavat, like Srila Prabhupada, established how he wanted initiation to go on and who should do it. Now in 1977, in the year that Srila Prabhupada was leaving this world, Prabhupada called the GBC men. He made it very clear he was leaving. He told them, you all discuss and ask whatever questions you want as to how things will go on in my absence. Very famous conversation. But here Srila Prabhupada said how he wants Diksha to continue in his absence. We begin. Satsvarup. Then our next question concerns initiations in the future, particularly at that time when you're no longer with us. We want to know how first and second initiation would be conducted. Prabhupada, yes, I shall recommend some of you. After this is settled up, I shall recommend some of you to act as officiating acharyas. Tamal Krishna. Is that called Ritvik Acharya? Prabhupada. Ritvik. Yes. Satsvarup. Then what is the relationship of that person who gives the initiation and the Prabhupada? He's Guru. He's Guru. Satsvarup. But he does it on your behalf. Prabhupada. Yes. That is formality. Because in my presence, one should not become Guru. So on my behalf, on my order, Amara Agya Guru Hana. Be actually Guru, but by my order. Satsvarup. So they may also be considered your disciples. Prabhupada. Yes, they are disciples. Why consider? Who? Tamal Krishna. No, he's asking that these Ritvik Acharyas, they're officiating, giving Diksha, they're the people who they give Diksha to. Whose disciples are they? Prabhupada. They're his disciples. Tamal Krishna. They're his disciples. Prabhupada. Who is initiating? He is grand disciple. Satsvarup. Yes. Tamal Krishna Maharaj. That's clear. Satsvarup. Then we have a question, concern, and now Prabhupada interjects. When I order, you become Guru, he becomes regular Guru. That's all. He becomes disciple of my disciple. That's it. Now in the ensuing days, Srila Prabhupada named 11 of his senior devotees, not all GBC men, and he named 11 men, not women, to act in the capacity of Diksha Guru. That was his choice. Is it significant that Prabhupada didn't name women? I think so. Some will say, well, it's not relevant. Prabhupada didn't name any Hispanics, he didn't name any blacks. But the history of ISKCON wasn't about Hispanics and blacks at that time. But rather, and Srila Prabhupada was very much aware that there was tension between some men and their attitude towards ladies, towards women in ISKCON. Just consider that 1 year earlier, in 1976, Srila Prabhupada dismantled the entire Radha Damodar Sankirtan party, which was his biggest book distributing party, in part for their prejudice against grihasthas and women. So Prabhupada was very much aware of the tendency to mistreat women. But still, he did not make Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. He had the opportunity. He was now appointing them. If he wanted to make a point of women's roles, that they should also be initiators, that this was what he actually meant in 1969, this was the time. And unfortunately, it was the last time. But he didn't. Srila Prabhupada could have. There are some highly regarded ladies in our movement, such as Jamuna Devi. Prabhupada could have proposed her, he didn't. And either in the time that he was with us, did Srila Prabhupada place a woman in the position of authority, such as GBC, temple president, BBT head, or any top-tier leader. Not appointing a Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā guru, which is very much a authority role, a leadership role, is in conformity with Srila Prabhupada's earlier conduct. And while Prabhupada talked to men about becoming initiators, Prabhupada never talked about or with his female disciples about initiation or that they should become initiators. Why not? All right, so let me just summarize this last part 3. Srila Prabhupada's commentary and his conduct made clear his intent regarding Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. This was the book Bhagavat and the person Bhagavat. And these are the primary evidence of what he wanted. And this is evidence that's strong. The letters and conversation should be seen in relationship to his written word and his conduct. We cannot outweigh 2 letters and a talk with a professor with our Shastra and the obvious statement of our founder Acharya, the statement of his conduct. So let me just summarize, final conclusion. The evidence for the Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā guru practice is contradictory, unclear, and weak. Moreover, Srila Prabhupada discounts that evidence. And his scriptural commentary says that women don't initiate, and by his conduct, he says that women don't become Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. So the strength of scripture and Prabhupada's conduct far outweighs the strength of the letters and conversations. Therefore, I would suggest reversing the decision. Whether that happens or not, Hare Krishna. But at least I would suggest a moratorium until ISKCON leadership is more mature to make such a decision. In short, safer than the current proposal is for ISKCON to do what Srila Prabhupada said and do what Srila Prabhupada did. No Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus. Hare Krishna. To be more clear, let me say yes. As Srila Prabhupada said, women can initiate and even be acharya. But if not at the stage of sadhana like men, as I've been arguing, but at the stage of perfection like Janava, what constitutes not so many, and a very special case, and how such a qualified Vaishnavi is recognized and empowered. Now the answers to these questions require time, discussion, and further spiritual maturity. That is the message of this video. I know Srila Prabhupada loved his daughters. I know that some were mistreated and still are. I know some devotees think that to compensate for their pain, women deserve to initiate. That for me makes no sense. I know the liberal feminists outside this movement expect this of us. I know some devotees accuse those not in favor of Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus of being male chauvinists, narrow-minded, part of an old boys club. I know there's a lot of intimidation of opponents of and proponents of Vaiṣṇavī Dīkṣā gurus, and that's not right. And I know that some people will feel hurt by what I say, and some will attack me for my stand and maybe call me names, but I'm following my conviction, albeit the conviction of an insignificant jiva. All that said, let me really make clear that I am an ISKCON man and a follower of the GBC, and in the last 50 years, I've always encouraged devotees to follow the GBC, and I'll continue to do that as long as I live. It's what Srila Prabhupada wanted of us. It runs in my veins. And while I express a dissenting opinion in this video, I'm critiquing a resolution and not the GBC or ISKCON. I'm also raising awareness why, following the GBC resolution, some yatras will not support Vaishnavis giving initiation. Still, we must all continue to embrace Srila Prabhupada's concept of unity in diversity. And so whatever our opinions, we should always remain united under the GBC and ISKCON. Finally, my humble request to devotees in general, ladies, GBC members, please forgive any offenses I may have caused in expressing myself. It's not my intent. Please, don't take it that way. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.